Thank you for the invitation and thank you for still being here. I'm a serial entrepreneur. When I go to America, they tend to get me some extra credits. When I'm in Norway, I tend to hide it because I still need to work for a living. So there's a cultural aspect, as we talked about before the break. If you are a serial entrepreneur and you still work for a living, what does that mean? I'm tempted to ask the gentleman over here, but I'll refrain from that. I'm here in two capacities, or actually three. I'm a professor teaching innovation at my university in Trondheim, Norway. My daytime job is to run a technology transfer office. We are 25 people. We've been at this since 2003. I'll share a little bit with that experience. And I guess my claim to fame here is that I'm also the president-elect of ASTP Proton. I'll come back a little bit to that. So I think this is the starting point. Hopefully this is not controversial, but I think it helps us to remind us. I'm assuming this is the same in your country as it is in mine. Universities are about three things: creating new knowledge, putting that knowledge into the minds of young people, and also disseminate the results to the broader benefit of society. They are reinventing this triangle every so often. Now the European Union calls it the knowledge triangle. It's still the same triangle. It has the three elements to it. And I think that's certainly the framework that I'm working in. I also feel that that's a very strong impetus from the new framework program in the European Union, and certainly what we see across Europe. And again, this is basically where it all started for most of us, the Baydole Act in the United States. 1980, most countries in Europe has adopted legislation, I think pretty much inspired by the philosophy of the Baydole Act. Certainly my country did. We implemented this in 2003, so this is still fairly new to most countries in Europe. I apologize, I don't know exactly the situation in Estonia, but I'm convinced we have roughly the same type legislation, which really, again, emphasizes the triangle that knowledge needs to benefit society at some level. There is also the opposing movement. We've seen this in the United States, some arguments against it, and it really comes down to what extent do we want universities to have a business role? To what extent are universities supposed to be economic entities? And again, this picture is very different, Europe versus the US. The endowment of Harvard University alone is bigger than most countries' GDP. In Europe, that's not the case, but the discussion we had earlier here also touches on what is the role of universities in terms of IP. The argument from our Finnish friend was that the universities have too high expectations of the value. So now, should universities be concerned about the value at all? If the university's role is to disseminate knowledge, why do we even have this issue? But we do, in every country across Europe. So at the philosophical level, what is really technology transfer? It sounds sort of simple, and I had a discussion in the break with Christian in terms of the pipe from university to industry. I'll come back a little bit to that. But fundamentally, is it a business or is it a service? I'm making a living out of doing this stuff, and I'm still sort of debating a little bit, what is it? I mean, it's almost, you almost feel sometimes like you're sort of a little bit pregnant. Not totally, but you're not quite. So is this where do you sit in the pipe that we talked about? Where does this technology transfer sit? Is it the pipe, it's in its entirety? And if so, how is it governed? And who are my masters? What's my loyalty? As the head of the technology transfer at my university, we have roughly 10,000 people, 40,000 students. It's a medium-sized university, strong technical, and we have a medical school. So who do I answer to? The answer is obviously my rector, clearly. I mean, make no mistake. But at the end of the day, how do we deal with it? Morten touched upon the non-practicing entities. We're now also seeing the reaction to that, commonly known as grasshoppers. So trolls are the big beasts that sits around forever and have eternity as their parameter. The grasshoppers are really quick on their feet, so they just tend to reap the benefits before the lawyers even get around to filing a lawsuit, much less take it to court. So we see whole new business models emerging. And my rhetorical point is, what is a university if it's not a non-practicing entity? Do we want universities to be able to practice their inventions? Probably not. So are universities then non-practicing entities? So again, what is the role? At the operational level, do you measure the success of technology transfer in terms of cash? Back to the list that Morten had. I'm certainly happy to be measured on license revenue generated, provided you, the taxpayers, are willing to wait 20 years. You know, I don't plan to have this job in 20 years. I'm more than happy for you guys to measure it in 20 years from now. Because the patent lasts for 20 years. If some of my bright researchers come up with a great new molecule that can cure cancer, it will go to market 10 years from now. And in 20 years, you will know how good it was. So is that an appropriate measure? So how do we deal with this? And Morten touched also the success criteria. What we're seeing is that, and what we're seeing, and I favor the UK approach. They talk about the refs in the UK. If you haven't looked at it, you really should, because they basically told universities or research groups, tell us in your own words to how did your research benefit society? Did you improve the way government is operating? Did you improve culture? Did you improve the livelihood? Did you improve our surroundings? Did you reduce pollution? Did you create new companies, new jobs? In what way did your research benefit society at large? The way the UK did it is requiring, rather than trying to count something, they basically required the researchers to tell the stories. I think we need to prepare ourselves for that. I think we will see more issues like that coming. Sweden is starting to look at it. The UK has looked at it. Basically, in the UK, a significant portion of the next 5-year funding in the UK will be based on the quality, the feedback in terms of to what extent did they serve the public sector, the community, for the last research they got. So this is a fairly significant iterative process happening as we speak in the UK. So the technology transferred, I want to get down to more sort of the operational side. It started in 1980. At the time, it really was about the money. It really was the notion that companies emerged out of Silicon Valley, and boy whiz, you know, the taxpayer should get something back from it. Second generation really developed that model to say that you need to combine great innovations from university with venture capitalists. And we heard just before the break that it sounds like that's starting to happen more in Estonia as well. It has happened to some extent in my country. We're seeing that growing, which is a good thing. The third generation, back to Ashley Stevens, and this is back in 2007, said that it's really about integrating. It's really about integrating the way universities work with industry, and the panel touched upon that a little bit a while back. In my mind, we are all at the second generation. Some universities in the US has migrated beyond this, but they have different culture, different aspects. In Europe, I would argue that the best ones are still at the second generation. I think we still have a ways to go. I think the European Union is pushing us in that direction, and I think that's what we need to prepare for. So what are the global trends? There is certainly growing awareness of IP. I really appreciated the story we heard from the military RF frequencies, because he had a very crisp strategy. I'd be interested to talk more about him in terms of freedom to operate. How can he go to other markets with the strategy he has? But he has a crisp strategy. I think we see more companies actually having that. Innovation is essential, obviously, new business model. Public funding for universities are decreasing, is my hypothesis. It is certainly not grown with the growth of GDP in my country, which, by the way, would have been fantastic with all the oil money that we have generated. But but in general it's decreasing. I was tempted to speak up before the break to say somebody needs to speak for the academics here, because we are paying the academics less, we're cutting funding for universities, and yet we expect these people to deliver more. That's what we as taxpayers are doing. The name of the game, I think, is impact. We're seeing that. We've seen that in the UK already. We're seeing it coming to several countries. Clearly, Innovation Union, Horizon 2020, is pushing this very hard. I'm getting feedback. My organization has never been more popular with the researchers than we are right now, because the researchers are coming back from Brussels with tear in their eyes to say that we had this tremendous application. We are doing wonderful science. We had top score on every single criteria for the funding project we were looking for. Only some of these reviewers found one little thing, that we got 14.5 rather than 15. So we didn't get any money. And the only thing they faulted us on was we didn't have a clear enough, credible enough plan for how this research will generate impact. I'd be very surprised if you don't have researchers in Estonia that are experiencing the same type of thing. And part of the answer is technology transfer. You need people, knowledgeable professionals in this area, to come up with credible plans and real live actions to make that happen. Because the net of it is that the taxpayers are demanding impact from the investment in public research. As a taxpayer, I'm in favor of this. As a taxpayer, I'm happy to some of my money to go to fund universities, because I do believe that knowledge is important. But I also want the impact on the society in which I live. And I do believe that this is sort of daunting. When I started this 12 years ago, I really felt that this is going to be a smooth sailing compared to running a startup company in Silicon Valley during the .com with venture capitalists from Sand Hill Road. This is going to be a breeze. I get a couple of friends involved. We figure this out. We create how hard can this be? It's not so hard, but it's extremely complex. I and my people have gone through probably 1,100 invention disclosures in this time, and we still haven't come across two that are even similar in terms of the technology behind it, in terms of the market opportunities, in terms of how you develop it through these different things. Partly because researchers are as different as human beings in general, and partly because there are so many parameters that needs to be aligned. So we truly need to think of this as an ecosystem, not a linear process. So I did take a little bit of issue with the notion of a pipe, because a pipe tends to have a unilateral flow. I think really we need to think of this as an interactive system. And part of it is that you need to bring people together who really didn't know that they would benefit from meeting. Somebody said that a university is not the good place. Campus is not a good place for that, because nobody goes on campus to meet somebody they didn't know they needed to meet. You go on campus to meet people you know you need to meet. So we need to create meeting places. We need to create networks. We need to create arenas that you bring together people that can make this ecosystem flourish. This is a picture from Progress TT, which is a project currently being funded by the Commission. And again, it emphasizes the ecosystem. You'll get the slide, so I don't want to go through the specifics of it, but again, the net of it is that this is a complex system of many ingredients, of which we probably are unable to model each particular aspect of it, as we still are not in biological ecosystems, but it all needs to interact and interplay. So it's called capacity building for practitioners of technology transfer. We all recognize that technology transfer is a subset of the broader knowledge transfer. Clearly, the knowledge transfer is the important one. My emphasis still is that we need to get the mechanics of it right. And in most countries, legislation really deals with technology in the sense of patents. So my point is not to underestimate the knowledge transfer aspect, but my point is simply that we need to get the technology transfer aspects figured out, and then it needs to be expanded. So the objective is really to contribute to economic growth in Europe. That's what the Commission is pushing. The notion is that in Europe today, the UK is pretty much leading, showing the way. Northern Europe has, to a larger extent, figured this out. Southern Europe is lagging, and Eastern Europe is also lagging, is the general notion. The way most countries are dealing with it is to get on a plane, to go first to Boston, and then you go to Stanford, and if you have more money left, you swing by Oxford and Cambridge. Certainly my superiors did. Then they come back and say, well, Karl, how hard can this be? You just do what they do in Boston. I mean, don't you speak English? I mean, what's the problem? And too many countries are making the same mistake. It's okay to go there to be inspired, but guess what? None of us are even similar to MIT, Stanford, Oxford, or Cambridge. We all work for institutions that are very different from those ones. So whoever came up with the notion that you can copy what they do should be dealt with. We need to be inspired, we need to learn from it, but we need to develop models that are suitable to the environments we all work in. So basically, the public sector funds 36% of all R&D spending in Europe. Our gentleman from Frost Sullivan said something about 10%, was it? 10% of the 80 billion is being exploited commercially. I don't know exact numbers, but clearly there is a logic that Europe needs to capture more value. More value needs to be created from the knowledge that this part of the world creates. Also, statistics show that it's more concentrated. There's a concern from the Commission that 10% only of the public research institutions in Europe capture 80% of the licensing revenue. The problem is not what those 10% are doing. The challenge is to have more people realize, work, operate with this. Not so much for the revenue, but really for the dissemination of knowledge, back to the research triangle. So the idea is that underperforming TTOs, new countries, new universities, people looking for it, don't go the same route. Let's create a body. Let's create a body of knowledge. Let's put together people. Let's create a network that people can tie into, learn from, and leverage from, rather than getting blue-eyed coming back from Boston and Harvard. So the idea, this is still work in progress, mind you. So this is just giving you a snapshot of the way the current thinking is. The current thinking is that you need to really look at this in a very context specific. Number one, what is the potential? I know of no university in Europe that has the same potential that Stanford does, or Princeton for that matter, with only 8,000 students. These are very different environments. So number one is, what is the potential of the research base we're talking about? How good are they? What kind of network do they have? Who do they work with? How many Nobel Prizes? Whatever, however you measure the potential. And then secondly, what is truly the ambition? Is this something the senior management of the university wants? Is it a nice to have or a need to have? Is it important, or is it just, if you got spare time, please look into this? Or is it genuinely something that society will measure the institution and the institution will measure its employees on? As a professor myself, I mean, it's sort of, I'm tempted to throw up my hands. I mean, what do you want from me? I mean, you want publications, students, courses, doctorates. You want everything. So make up your mind how important this is. What is truly the ambition for the department, for the institution, for the nation? And then thirdly, what is truly the capacity? Do you have people in place to actually make this happen? Do you have access to funding? Do you have anything that can be developed into an ecosystem? What are the components of an ecosystem? What is your specialties in your area? And I'm fascinated with what I'm learning from Tallinn and the history and the culture that you guys have. So I'm thinking that, boy whiz, this could easily be a hotspot in certain areas from the characteristics of your environment. I had the pleasure of having dinner with Esko Aho some years back, the former Prime Minister of Finland, and he's actually said that the best thing that ever happened to Finland was that suddenly they had 9,000 IT engineers looking for work. And lo and behold, today Helsinki is a hotspot for gaming. His logic was that Helsinki probably would not be hotspot for gaming today had Nokia succeeded. Don't take me as the, but it's an interesting logic. In my own country, unemployment has been a theoretical concept for the last 30 years. Last year, somebody dropped the oil price from a comfortable level all the way down to $30 a barrel. That is changing the environment that I live in. Suddenly we have 130,000 people unemployed. Of those 130,000 people, we have roughly 40,000 who are well educated, experienced. They know a whole lot about drilling holes and creating pipes and pumping stuff. There's got to be an opportunity. As we talked about, access to clean water is one of the tremendous drivers in the world. Maybe some of these people in Norway can apply their knowledge in a totally different field. And then once you define the context and the peculiarities and the desires and the capacity and the potential and the ambition, you need to look into then how do you actually put this in place. And again, this Progress TT group, what we are saying is that first of all, you need to create the picture. I mean, it's like doing a puzzle. If you get a box full of jigsaw puzzle and you don't have the picture on the box, it'll take a while. So we think that we do need to create, a picture needs to be created based on, again, the ambition, the capacity, and the potential. Once you have the picture, you can define the pieces. What are the pieces that needs to be fitted, whether it's on the national level, institutional level, or regional city, whatever level you look at. You truly need to define the pieces, and it extends far beyond assuming that there is sort of a linear process. And then the process, how do you put this together? How do you make this happen? Again, we've been at this for 12, 13 years in Norway, and we're still trying to figure out these processes to get this to interact. The good news in Norway, as it is here, that it's a small country and you tend to know people. So we know each other at the universities. But I mean, getting two professors to talk to each other is hard enough if they work at the same institute. And getting them to talk across universities, we think we are getting there with one example. I'll tell you about that next time. And then the people. How do you train the people? How do you get this, bring this together? And I dare advertise a little bit about ASTP Proton, simply because it is a non-profit association. I'm proud to be heading it. I do believe in the power of it, because it's a pan-European association for professionals. We focus upon the operational aspect of it. We have a network, we have gatherings, we have training, we have conferences. The whole idea is to bring together people to professionalize the profession. Trine has raised her hand a little bit, Trine Tullik has raised her hand a little bit to see whether we can create a national association in Estonia to make that connection. And we would very much welcome all of you as members and to take advantage of the network that we are putting in place. So to really answer the eternal question, the success, what are the success criteria then for the tech trans? It's really a number of deals. I believe in customer satisfaction. I think we need to get better at asking how people experience it. But it begs the question, so who are my customers? Is it the professor? Is it the venture capitalist? Or is it big industry? It's a little bit of all, which makes this really hard. Student involvement is important. Our experience is that they represent a tremendous resource. The type of companies that students create varies a lot. But as I mentioned yesterday, we had one student that are now already in 2 years, he has made more money than I will through my entire career. So, I mean, there are good examples. I'm a little bit envious, but. And for the university, it really comes down to impact. Kevin Cullen once said that this is really very simple, was his point, because in industry, reputation follows money. The more money you have, the higher your reputation. In academia, it's the other way around. The higher your reputation, the more money you attract. So his point is that truly what's important for public research organizations is the reputation, because then you attract the money and everything else flows with it. So it's really all about people, as we touched upon. These are 4 or 5 guys that used to work for me. They were managing 5 different projects. They all came to me to say that I resigned my job at the Tech Trans office because I want to bring these projects out into the market. They all did. They all succeeded to the extent that they got tremendous experience and didn't lose personal money. One of the companies failed. One was acquired at a nominal level. One was acquired with a significant profit, enabling one of them to buy a great new apartment and a brand new car. And one is still at it. So he is still, he's in this, like this 5th or 6th year now. He's still a believer, he's still running. And the 5th one gave up and got a job with Statoil, which is really the saddest part of the whole thing. But it's really about people. I think we cannot emphasize that enough. So anybody welcome to join us in this association, and hopefully we can make more connections and make more friends in that context. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions?
I must have been able to provoke one of you. No.
Thank you, Karl, and I have to fulfill my promise to ask questions. So you have been, I guess this is the first time for you to be here in Estonia, right?
It is.
And you have been talking to some people and seeing what we are discussing here. So in your professional experience, what would be the first step Estonia should consider doing on starting its way to building the technology transfer profession and the field and the strategies and so on to help it grow the economy here? Thanks.
It's obviously a very hard question, but I'm tempted to say that there's a very simple answer. I really believe that success breeds success. I think that I'm sure you already have some positive experiences that deserves to be known by more people. I would encourage you to take advantage of these networks. Certainly Trine already knows a whole lot of people in this network, as do I. Please come, I'm happy to connect you. So I think number 1, publish some of the good experiences you already have, create some heroes. Secondly, get more people into appreciating the complexity and to be inspired and motivated to work with it. And then put together a meeting place. One of the things that Morten talked about, I mean, these are what we have seen twice now in the little village that I live in, is really students who have gone outside of anybody's realm and basically rented space in the center of the city. I'm sure they got some sponsors somewhere, but certainly not from the university. So really sort of these people who are able to put things together and start making things happen. I think on the broader issue, which goes into politics, really, and we touched upon it earlier, I really think that what all of our countries, I know of no country have figured this out yet, is really that at the national level, I wish that parliaments and the people granting the money would add to the list that they measure universities on to also include one aspect of innovation, impact, whatever you call it. In my country, my rector, my university does not get measured on its ability to create impact, which means that I'm basically an expense to my rector because I don't help him improve on the metrics that he gets measured on. Subsequently, when PhDs and young people are promoted in the universities, again across Europe, their ability to create impact, to work with external parties, to create innovation, startups, license agreements, patents, none of that counts towards careers, towards promotions. So the net of it is, you really need to get to my age, once you are qualified yourself as a professor, which psychologists will say is way beyond your age of creativity, then you can, which is really sad. We need young, bright people to get tuned in, but in order to encourage that, they need to be able to have some benefit in terms of their career to do it. But that's the really long aspect to it. And again, I think all countries are on the same type of challenge.
Thank you. I'm Tamara. I'm from the World Intellectual Property Organization. And you said there is no point in going to Boston and to Oxford. And
I didn't quite say that.
Yeah, but you can be inspired, but
yes.
you have to
Yes.
find the local solution.
Yes.
And but surely there must be some common parameters, characteristics that are applicable, because we are working with many countries around the world, particularly developing countries. And if Norway is finding it hard, how would these other countries even think about it or dream about it? So what do you think about that?
That was a good point. I maintain that, I mean, I know Kathy Koo at Stanford and Alita Nelson at MIT. They're wonderful people to talk to be inspired by. But I do maintain my point that the culture at those places, the brands they enjoy, the way they operate, as Alita Nelson says that, I really, at the Alita Nelson, the head of Tech Trans at MIT in Boston, her point is that, Karl, I really don't have to go out to talk to these venture guys because they live in the bushes around campus. But when the phone rings, I do pick it up. Where in my environment, I constantly have to be on the marketing and sales to attract people to get into it. And also the faculty members, there's a very different culture in the United States. Certainly at the big institutions, you see a lot more of faculty members rotating in and out of industry. In my environment, that's very rare. And again, because of the way we promote people into senior positions in academia, if you take a swing out in industry, you delay your career. So it happened very rarely. The interesting part, the second part of your question, how can other countries benefit when Norway struggles with all the oil money? How can others? And again, my best answer really is to work with the young people, because I think that's where the energy is. And then you really need to create meeting places where young people with energy meet people like me that know a whole lot of people. So I think, to me, the key really is the arranging for people to meet who didn't know they needed to meet. And hopefully that would also be a recipe in other countries.
I have one question also. I had a question about...
You should talk more about the pipe. But
yes, surely. But I had a question about the measuring problem, but you eloquently answered with the two last answers that one. So excellent mind reading skills. But I have then a question about two levels. We have the university level, so to say, and the national level. And I guess the university level could be somewhat similar in Norway and Estonia. But the challenges in national level are different since Estonia is smaller. You probably don't know the ins and outs of Estonian system, but what do you think, how the smaller nations are different compared to Norway, for example, kind of regarding those challenges, or what must they do differently?
Again, I know very little about your country, but I mean, Norway is, I mean, we're 5 million people and you are 1.4, so it's not that different. That's true. But again, you have to appreciate that in Norway, this oil economy that we all benefit from, clearly we do. I mean, I'm not suggesting otherwise, but it's really sort of alien to us, because we read in the newspaper, because all this money is put into one huge fund, and it's the biggest sovereign fund on the planet, and it contains something like 1,000 billion euros. I mean, this is way beyond anything that I can imagine. So we read about that, oh, you know, last quarter this fund increased by umpteen gazillion something rather. And I mean, yeah, we're glad to have it. I mean, don't get me wrong. I appreciate having it, but it really has little to do with my daily life. So I guess my assumption is that at the national level, our two systems may not be that different. We just, and again, because of the growth of the oil economy, our challenges has been different for the last 30 years. Now, I suspect we are more similar. And now we, for the first time in history, we have a Minister of Education in my country who actually says the words commercialization and research in the same sentence. We haven't had that before. And I'd be surprised if your Minister of Education uses those terms in the same sentence very often. So I think gradually we see things happening. And as I mentioned before, when the top researchers at my university with very high reputation, tremendous resumes and everything, when they come back from Brussels to say that, you know, we had this wonderful application, but it fell through because we didn't have enough. Our section on technology transfer was very good, but it wasn't perfect. And to get money from Brussels these days, it needs to be perfect. So I think we are seeing changes, and although we are not part of your EU and you are, we still are part of it, everything to do with research and innovation. So I suspect, my prediction is that the same forces will move all of us, and I think they are moving us, I believe, in a good direction, because I do believe in the notion that taxpayers' investment in knowledge really need to benefit society. But I also believe that that needs to be looked at in a much broader sense than number of spin-offs. I really do believe in the way the UK is doing it. Leave it to the researchers. If they cannot demonstrate, visualize, document, convince that their work has benefited society in some way, then as a taxpayer, I'd much rather put that money to somebody else.
I would like to make one comment to this discussion, which is very interesting. I think what we have been lacking in my country, at least some years back, is a sense of urgency. And we rely on that we are going to stay rich, stay ahead of the, of the race, so to say. There seems to be perhaps some changes in that now when unemployment is going up and so on. But that is the sort of the backside of the medallion of actually becoming a very rich nation. You don't have that kind of sense of urgency, the need for speed, that we have to change something now. You know, for 2 centuries, Norwegian politicians have been talking about what are we going to live off after the oil age, right? You know, so the sort of the knowledge society is always something, you know, up there ahead of us.
My name is Arne, and my question or comment would be an attempt to translate what Christian asked recently. What are the similarities, in your opinion, and differences between the country of high productivity and approach to innovation and low productivity countries' approach to innovation, because these are different? This is where we are recorded in OECD club as the with very low records, and here is the breakthrough question and task setup problem as well, which is the core issue in order to serve a good answer for Christian's organization, Estonian Development Fund, as well.
But then by implication, you're saying that Norway is high productivity?
Absolutely.
Oh, I guess I should feel good about that, but
you are listed on high productivity club list, and Estonia is listed as a low productivity country.
So is the implication that you guys are lazier than us?
This is according to definition how Brussels defined and how modern science defines, and the last surveys and definitions, which is the approach to modern definition to talk about innovation. So Morten pointed out that it's important to talk about the same things, the same words, with being intended to understand at the same attempt at the first time. And my response from Estonian side is our nationality is facing the problem that we need to learn to explain and express ourselves in our native language. First of all, to start from the same words for the same understanding, for the same meaning at the first attempt. And yet, at this stage, we can make a collective attempt to be understood to the rest of the world. Why? Thank you.
I was not aware of those statistics, but I'd be tempted to sort of circumvent your question to say that I think there are really strong similarities. I just learned from the lady from the Norwegian embassy here that there are more ties between our two countries than I was aware of. There are more relationships already, and from what I've learned just these 2 days, my sense is that although you speak not understandable in your language, the culture, the mindset, the appearance, the way we communicate seems to be very similar. So I guess what I'm taking away from my visit here is that there are very strong similarities. Although language is different, history is different, there still seems to be very cultures and aspirations that are very similar. So I just come back to I think this needs to be addressed bottom up. I think it needs to come down to find the people who are able and willing. In my experience, there's a whole bunch of people that are willing. There's a whole bunch of people that are able. But there are very few people who are both able and willing. So you need to find those people. You need to train the people who are willing and able, and you need to discourage the people. But you need both those combinations. And I think that the new generation of students, they are much more similar than us gray-haired ones.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you.